When James Carter was accused of a crime he didn't commit, he could never have imagined how quickly his life would turn into a nightmare. In the courtroom, the white judge, with a cold smile, delivers the verdict, shattering everything James thought he knew about justice. But once behind bars, James decides he will not simply be a victim of a system built on hatred. He must not only prove his innocence, but also change the laws that led him to this prison. What follows will shock even the most experienced. But let's go back to the beginning. James Carter grew up in a small provincial town where the color of your skin always mattered. He was known for his kindness, respect for others, and dreams of a better life. From childhood, James knew that the world around him was unjust, but he sought to change that by setting an example. Working in a local auto repair shop, he planned to open his own business and one day leave this town behind. One evening, while walking home from work, James saw police sirens and patrol cars near a local store. It turned out the store had been robbed, and one of the witnesses allegedly saw a black man running from the scene. The police arrested James, claiming he matched the description of the suspect, despite having no clear evidence. The situation escalated quickly. James was denied bail, even though there was no solid evidence against him. The investigation made no effort to review footage that could have provided him with an alibi. A few weeks later, the trial began, presided over by Judge Haig, a man known for his harsh sentences. His name was on everyone's lips in the town, and his reputation left no doubt. His rulings were always severe, especially when it came to black defendants. During the trial, James presented witnesses and evidence proving his innocence. But the judge paid no attention to these facts, and instead focused on the fact that the police had acted according to the law. The prosecutor built the case on assumptions, and the words of one witness who didn't see the robber's face but claimed that the resemblance was there. James felt like he was in a nightmare, a puppet in the hands of a system. Despite a clear alibi, Judge Haig delivered the verdict. James was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Cries of horror and outrage filled the courtroom as James, confused and shocked, realized that his entire life had been destroyed by one unjust decision. This moment became a point of no return for James. Sitting in his prison cell during the first days after the verdict, he pondered how his dreams had been shattered in an instant. He realized he had become a victim of a system that refused to see his innocence. Now, his goal was to survive and fight. In the first months of imprisonment, James went through all the stages of despair. He faced brutal treatment from guards and prejudice from fellow inmates. Many prisoners, especially black ones, were in prison for similar reasons: systemic bias, weak evidence, and an indifferent court. James was not alone, but that only deepened his pain. He realized that here, behind bars, proving his innocence seemed impossible. His dreams of opening a repair shop were replaced by dark thoughts of revenge. However, one day, he came across a book on justice left in the prison library. For the first time since his arrest, he felt a spark of interest and thirst for knowledge. James began reading every book on law, rights, and the judicial system he could find. At first, it was a way to distract himself, but then it became a real passion. He discovered that many laws were written in ways that allowed for different interpretations, and that knowledge could uncover loopholes and strategies for defense. With every book he read, James began to understand how unjust the system was, and that his case was just one of many examples. In his newfound knowledge, he found a tool for resistance. Against the backdrop of books and legal cases, he became a symbol of hope for other inmates. James started helping them file complaints, submit petitions for case reviews, and protect their rights. Many began turning to him for advice, and he felt his efforts were not in vain. Every evening, alone with his thoughts, James fought an internal battle. He asked himself questions like, can I really change anything from within a prison cell? And is it even worth fighting when everything seems so hopeless? But thoughts of his family, still outside, and of the other innocent people locked up with him, kept him going. This struggle hardened his spirit and strengthened his resolve. A few months later, James decided to file his own appeal. He knew the chances of success were slim, but it became a symbol of resistance for him. The appeal was rejected, but James did not back down. He wrote a letter to a local human rights organization, detailing his case and the injustice he faced. His story caught the attention of activists, and soon, lawyers willing to fight for a retrial joined the case. At that moment, James realized that his personal battle had extended beyond the prison walls. He understood that now, his case was not just about his innocence, but a symbol of resistance against a system that broke the lives of Black people every day. A new resolve ignited within him, and he knew he had to keep fighting, no matter what. James's story attracted the attention of a human rights organization, and soon the media began talking about him. His case was discussed on news channels, and people on social media began asking questions about the fairness and impartiality of the justice system. James became a symbol of the fight against wrongful convictions, and his voice was finally heard. Letters of support poured in, with words from people who didn't know him personally, but understood his pain and the injustice he had faced. Meanwhile, former Judge Haig found himself under scrutiny as well. Local journalists began digging into his past cases, and it soon became clear that James was not the only Black man sentenced by him with a lack of fairness. Under public pressure, Haig decided to make a statement. In an interview, he tried to justify himself, claiming that he had always acted within the law and had not allowed any bias. However, his words found no support. In response to his interview, public outrage only grew, and the calls for justice intensified. Seeing the growing discontent, Judge Haig began to reflect on his actions. He remembered each person whose life he had ruined with his rulings, and for the first time in a long time, felt pangs of guilt. He couldn't understand how he had become an instrument of a system capable of such cruelty toward people. Deep down, he knew he could no longer ignore the truth that was now staring him in the face. Then, the judge did something unexpected. He reached out to the human rights organization that was helping James and expressed a desire to meet with him. A few days before the meeting, James was informed that Judge Haig wanted to talk to him. At first, James felt anger. He couldn't understand what had driven the judge to seek a meeting with him, and what he hoped to achieve after everything that had happened. But then he realized that this might be an opportunity for something bigger. And so, in the prison's visitation room, James and Judge Haig sat face to face. The judge struggled to find the right words, but finally admitted that he recognized his injustice. He explained that, while holding his position, he hadn't thought about the damage he was causing with his rulings, and that now he had finally seen the true nature of the system he had been a part of for so long. James listened in silence, his gaze cold and calm. He understood that he wouldn't get back the years lost in prison, but he saw that the judge's words, though late, were sincere. The meeting ended, and James felt that this event marked a turning point for both of them. He saw how his story, which had begun with injustice, was now changing the minds of people, even those who had once stood on the opposite side. From that day, James knew that his case had not only impacted his own life, but had also set in motion changes that could make the system better. After his meeting with Judge Haig, James felt a renewed sense of strength. His case had become high profile, and public interest continued to grow. Support from public organizations and activists bore fruit. James's case was reviewed. The court acknowledged the mistakes made, and soon he was released. Upon leaving prison, James knew that his fight was far from over. The first thing James did was join the movement for justice system reform. He began speaking at rallies, sharing his story, and raising awareness about others who had suffered from wrongful convictions. People were inspired by his words, and soon he became one of the movement's leaders. He traveled throughout the state, speaking to different audiences, and everywhere he went, he was met with warmth and gratitude. But James didn't stop there. He began working with lawmakers, pushing for legal changes to reduce the number of wrongful convictions and improve oversight of judges' actions. Thanks to his efforts, several new bills aimed at increasing transparency in the judicial process and introducing additional measures against racial discrimination were passed. James saw how his work was starting to make a difference. The judicial system, in which he had once been a victim, was now beginning to change. Judge Haig, feeling responsible for his past mistakes, became an ally in James's fight for reform. Together, they spoke at various forums, discussing the need for changes and calling for reforms. The judge sincerely regretted his former blindness and his speeches confirmed that even those who had once upheld the system could reevaluate their role and change their views. Soon, their joint efforts attracted national media attention. They gave interviews, appeared on television, and shared their story, emphasizing the importance of reforms. James became the face of the fight against injustice, while Haig became a symbol of how one can rethink their role in the system and change their perspective. In the final chapter of this story, James, standing before a gathered crowd, spoke of a future in which such injustices would be eradicated. He knew that much work remained to be done, but could see how his story inspired others to fight for their rights. After every speech, people approached him, shared their experiences, and told him how his example had changed their lives. James knew that he had not only restored justice for himself, but had also made strides toward ensuring that everyone could count on fair justice. His journey, which began in despair and hopelessness, had turned into a symbol of hope and belief in a better future. His story became a reminder that even one person can change the system if they have the determination and the support of those willing to fight for change.